This is Jonathan, and I'm speaking today with Tom Delaney, the Director of Government Affairs for the Planet Organization. Hi, Tom. How are you doing?
Pretty good. And yourself?
I'm doing really good. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this and have this call with us today. Um, some people might know you, but I know you're heavily involved in Planet and have been for a very long time. But for those that don't, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I've actually been with Planet, or the combined associations, ALCA, Associated Landscape Contractors, and Professional Lawn Care Association of America. I came from the Lawn Care Association of America, and we've been Planet, I guess maybe now it's going on 7 years. And so with the combined groups, I've been with them for 23 years, and was actually the executive vice president of Professional Lawn Care Association for 5 years, and so been combined for 23 years. And prior to that, I was with the Georgia Department of Agriculture Pesticide Division and worked with licensing and enforcement of pesticide applicators. So I've dealt with environmental issues, and also since I've joined Planet, I've dealt with immigration and H2B issues.
Good. And so with all you've done in your experience, what's a typical day or week look like for you? What do you spend most of your time doing?
It's pretty varied because I'm dealing with local, state, and federal laws and regulations, and I'm a department of one. We do have a hired lobbyist in Washington to help us with Hill work, and I still go to Washington occasionally to do Hill visits, and also are on EPA Federal Advisory Committee on pesticides. So the days get pretty varied, from answering questions from members on different issues to working on grassroots information, trying to get our members to contact state and federal legislators on issues that are important to us. So it gets pretty varied, going back and forth from environmental to labor type issues, and some of them technical and business related.
Is there one you spend most of your time on? I mean, is any one topic right now taking up most of your time?
Well, H2B has been the biggest issue, because right now we're actually involved in 2 lawsuits and suing the U.S. Department of Labor over their program rule and their wage rule. And actually Planet has spent $25,000 on the lawsuit to try and stop them from implementing these new requirements. And then at the same time, we've been working with Congress to get them to try and block the law from their aspect. So we've been spending a lot of time on that, and then environmental areas, been spending time on fertilizer laws and regulations around the country. That's kind of been spreading on nitrogen. In the past, they've been on phosphorus, and now lately they've been on nitrogen. So those are probably the 2 biggest issues that we've been concerned with over the last 6 months to a year almost now.
Okay. Well, interestingly, those are the 2 that I think about the most as well. So, and as we had talked before, through Lawn Care Millionaire and Service Autopilot, I get a lot of questions, and these are 2 of the big ones. We have a lot of clients in Canada, and then a lot of our clients here in the U.S., they understand what's going on in Canada and how that has changed up there. So those 2 topics, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about both. Maybe if we could start with labor. That's one we hear from our clients constantly as they solve their marketing problems and figure out how to grow their businesses, or if they're really young in business with just 3 employees. Labor's really probably the top concern we hear about. So where are we at with labor at the moment from your perspective?
Well, certainly, part of the issue has changed because of the economy. In the H2B program, there's a cap on how many workers can come in, and the cap is 66,000, 33,000 for the first part of the federal fiscal year and 33 for the second part. And when we first got in the H2B issues, we were constantly trying to work on ways to get the cap raised. And at one point in time, when we suggested they don't count returning workers, that particular year got up to over 120,000 workers actually came under the H2B program, and that's when the economy was going great. And over the last couple of years, because of the economy, the issue hadn't been the cap. In fact, the cap hadn't been reached, I think, in the last two fiscal years because of the economy. And so the real issue has been the program rule that was suggested by or put out by regulation by the U.S. Department of Labor and the wage rule. And for those that's listening, that whether you use the program or don't use the program, it still affects you. And those might also be interested in finding out what's involved in getting into the H2B program. But, the landscape industry, as those that are in it know, it's labor intensive. You've got ground crews that you have to use for the work. In the lawn care, chemical lawn care application, a lot of times if you're in the residential area, one person can make a pretty good living in spraying lawns if he has enough lawns or granular applications. And in the landscape area, it seems most of the lawn care applications are either mowing or on commercial contracts. Mm-hmm. Well, because of the labor intensiveness and because the seasonality of the business in many states, they found the problem of trying to find workers that they were only going to use for 8 to 10 months out of the year, and then not need them the other time of the year. And it's tough trying to find employees that want to work under those same conditions. So that's where I think the H2B program came in, where it was a temporary need, temporary or seasonal need, and you got the workers for 10 months or less, and that fit into those that were either bidding on contracts that if they won they needed the workers, or with the seasonality and also the location, trying to find other workers made it more difficult. And so those that don't use the program, the question is, too, of the workers that they have and whether they have the proper paperwork or not. Certainly companies know they have to follow the requirements of getting the proper documentation of the worker to prove that he's eligible to work, that he's legal to work, but we also know the paperwork sometimes is not legal. But if the paperwork looks good, you're required to take it, and so you can actually be sued if you start not following the procedures for all workers. So those that have workers that may have questionable paperwork, when they get a Social Security no-match letter, or when anything in Congress is going to change how they deal with comprehensive immigration reform, or even if you get audited. We understand one of our members got audited and lost 30 of his employees, but yet he was not in violation of any requirements. He had all the proper paperwork that was required, and it all looked good, but once they actually verified the workers' legality and Social Security numbers and paperwork, found out that 30 of them were not eligible to work. So all of a sudden he lost all those workers.
Well,
so
were these 30 workers in the H2B program, or just 30 workers that were here locally that he had paperwork on?
These were locally that he had, and again had driver's license or Social Security cards on, so he had the proper documentation in his records. So there he was at doing everything he was required to do, and there he was at a loss of not having the workers to do the contracts and the jobs he's had. So for some of the reasons I mentioned, people have gone to the H2B program, and it's a program that you've have to follow the requirements to and qualify for by following the required steps. And so just because you want to use the program, that doesn't mean that you may be eligible to use it. First of all, you have to apply for the workers 120 days before the date of need. And the U.S. Department of Labor works with the State Department of Labor under contract to be the first step in the process. And you have to advertise in the local newspaper for American workers. And the paperwork is pretty complicated. I'd say that probably 95% of all the industries that use H2B, and that is the seafood industry, the landscape industry, the hotel and restaurant industry, the thoroughbred industry. There's just a lot of seasonal and temporary businesses that use the H2B guest worker program. And so once in filling the paperwork out, it's so difficult that, like I say, 95% of the people use agents, not only to fill the paperwork out, but if you're wanting to get those workers in, those agents work with recruiters to help you find those workers in the particular country that you're maybe bringing them in. And the majority of them do come from Mexico, but a lot of them come from other South American countries. So you start 120 days, you fill out the paperwork, you do the advertising and stuff, and get through the first process with the idea of trying to get certified with the U.S. Department of Labor for a certain amount of workers. And while we never encourage people to request more workers than you need, because some companies have wasted the numbers of visas or certifications by requesting too many workers, you've got to at least request a few more than you need, because the workers, once they get interviewed at the consulate offices, could be refused to come in. Then you're short those visas, or those workers may not work out and you may have to send them home, or they may have a relative or somebody get sick and have to go back home, and then you're short those workers. So some of them get those additional workers. But after the app get approved by the State Department of Labor and then goes to U.S. Department of Labor, you receive a certification for a certain number of workers. And there's a prevailing wage that you're required to pay that's based on not just the state you're in, but the location you're in. Say, Texas, for example, there may be a prevailing wage in Dallas and a prevailing wage in Austin that's based on interviewing workers that are in the same field or companies of what they're paying these workers. So you have to advertise for U.S. workers. You have to pay a certain required wage for these workers, and then you're paying your agent, and you're paying a premium processing fee with the next step, which is $1,000 with USCIS, and that's the immigration service, and they're the ones that will give you the final approval to request and get your workers after you've gotten your certification from the U.S. Department of Labor. And then the last step in that is the State Department, who will end up setting up appointments for your workers at the consulate offices where they're interviewed before they come into the country. And sometimes they'll ask questions, and if they don't answer the questions right or feel that they're a flight risk and may not come back, then they're not approved to come over. But the majority of the people using the H2B program have been using it for years, and the workers, many of them have been coming back for 5 and 10 years. And so the next problem that has come along with the H2B program is these proposed regulations by the U.S. Department of Labor, who actually, they say they're protecting American workers and that they're also protecting the H2B workers, but in fact they're trying to implement regulations that make it so costly and abusive that people will not want to use the program anymore. If the wage rules go into requirement, which in most cases require you to pay up to 50% more per hour for your workers, and then per hour for the H2B workers, and then saying any U.S. workers that similarly does the job that you're going to have to pay that same amount for that worker. And so that's part of what the wage rule is. And then the program rule is implementing so many other requirements in it that it's going to be costly and more hoops to jump through that people are really not going to want to use the program. There's an H2A program, which is an agricultural program, and they don't really have a cap. And as you may know, the agricultural industry nationwide has had a lot of problems trying to find workers. And so they have a bunch of illegal workers, so some of them are used the H2A program, but it's become so cumbersome to use and so much litigation in it and being sued and stuff that it doesn't care if they don't have a cap. People are not using the program, and so the Department of Labor has actually taken some of the same requirements from H2A and putting them in H2B. And so we know that people aren't going to want to use it based on the H2A companies not using the program. I mean, one provision up to 30 days before somebody comes to your workers cross, if an American wants the job and he's somewhere, some other state across, you have to pay his transportation over to your location and see if he's going to take the job. And I know most people pretty much want the American workers anyhow, but they're just not able to find them. Some of our member companies have had to get into the HR business, human resource business, and hire somebody, and it's a constant merry-go-round. Many of them told stories of having 5 or 10 openings and interviewing 100 people to find somebody to fill those few positions, and then finding a few, and then they don't last but a few days or just are not fulfilling the requirements of the job. So it's gotten much more difficult to field a crew of doing work. And even because of the economy slowing down, eventually it's going to get better, and eventually we're going to all want those workers again that we need. And some of the states have been passing more difficult legislation on having to do e-verify of the Social Security numbers before the worker comes to work, and having more penalties against the illegal workers, or taking business licenses away, as Arizona has a requirement if you're hiring or employing illegal workers. So it's a problem. The problem is not only going to be hiring them, but if they go back and check existing employees through Social Security no-match letters or anything else and do some of that verification, you'll end up like that employer that lost 30 workers. So that's sort of a nutshell about some of the immigration problems. And, of course, the Congress with an election year haven't wanted to address the comprehensive immigration reform, and because of these regulations, we have gotten together with several other parties and sued the Department of Labor and have a temporary injunction against the program rule, not the wage rule, but Congress has the wage rule on hold until September 30th, and now the way they fund the government with continuing resolutions to just take what the existing budget is and roll it over for several more months, it looks like that's what they've done, or they have done, which will make that temporary injunction on the wage rule continue on till possibly March or April, because it's part of that continuing resolution of funding the government. But that doesn't include the wage rule. So we need the lawsuit, a ruling on the lawsuit to cover the wage rule, and then all the same arguments are given, which will end up applying to the program rule at the same time too, so that we'll get the program rule an injunction, then it will carry over to the wage rule, and we won't need a Congress, but we have to keep working from both aspects. And we've spent close to $300,000 on the lawsuit already, and we're needing additional funds to keep it going. So whether you use the program or not, if we want a program in the future that's workable, we need to save the program and contribute towards the lawsuit.
When is this ruling expected on the program rule side? So I realize the wage rule might be delayed till March or April, or the wage rule. But when you have any
we
feel
just
on that?
filed just yesterday. The U.S. Department of Labor has filed an appeal. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals is where it's at, and our lawyers just today filed their papers answering the appeal by the Department of Labor. So we think a ruling should be coming soon on the regulation rule that will also affect the wage rule. So we have a good case, and based on the judge that we have in the Northern District of Florida and the questions she asked the Department of Labor, and the fact of our main contention is that the Department of Labor doesn't even have the statutory authority to promulgate these rules that they have put out there, and they really haven't been able to answer that to the judge to this point. So we will be asking after the appeals for a summary judgment, which will speed it up and hopefully will come soon.
My feeling on this has been that basically behind the scenes with the increased complexity that's being introduced in the program, that it's basically trying to be dismantled or done away with. Is that a fair assessment? Am I thinking about that correctly?
Yes, by trying to make it like the H2A program and try to make it more difficult to use and expensive, people just won't use the program anymore. People will have to, and some have either had to downsize and just take less business based on the number of employees that they've had, or some of them may just plain have to go out of business as not being able to field a workforce. And some of them, because of where their locations are, they're in resort areas, so it's that much more difficult to find employees to work. Or there's even parts of the country where if they had illegal workers, they would use them, but they don't even have them there. So finding a workforce has become more and more difficult in our field and in the other industries that are seasonal or use temporary workers.
So for a small or younger, well, really for any company, but a small company as well, and I know it's a company decision, but with all this going on, is it still wise to, if it makes sense to be in the program, is it still wise to try to join the program and become part of it?
Well, I think the decision has to be made is how difficult is it for you to find employees and keep them for the period of time, or 12 months. And if you can find a workforce, that's probably the better thing to do, because the program is costly to use also. You've got to add up what it costs of your agent fees for processing and the application fees for processing, and evaluate the company that you're using, how well they'll be able to fill the paperwork out, because sometimes just having paperwork turned down can cause you enough trouble to not get your workers on time. And when you're dealing with contracts and expecting workers to come at a certain time, you want to have a reliable company that processes the paperwork for you and answers. There's been more and more auditing being done by the Department of Labor. Part of the Department of Labor is wage and hour, and they've been coming out auditing companies that use the program and companies that don't use the program, looking at the way you're paying workers and what you're withholding, and making sure that you're paying what's required by the federal government for H2B workers or the non-H2B workers. So, there's still companies using the program, and they just have to judge the cost of it and what the alternative is of not using it. And there's companies that are getting ready to file again soon their paperwork. And as we look at what we've got with Congress and the lawsuits, we look pretty well that we think we're going to be successful in it. But it's like anything else. I don't want to rely on the U.S. legislature doing anything that is going to affect my livelihood.
Right.
It may wait further to see how they might do something, and the same thing with the courts, as we see Supreme Court rulings and things like that affect the health care ruling that we'll have to deal with, and immigration by the states. So we all do what we need to do based on our expectations for fulfilling existing contracts and certainly in the growth. Even though the economy has been tough, some companies are still doing okay, and some of them still have plans for growth. And having a workforce is one of the main issues with the growth that companies intend to have or want to have.
I've known of several companies that have been through audits for H2B. What is usually the biggest risk or biggest thing that a company needs to do? I mean, obviously they need to follow the requirements and letter of the law if they're going to be in the program. But what are watch-outs or any advice you have for a company to protect themselves in case they go through an audit, or how to handle themselves if they go through an audit?
Well, one of the keys to audit is being able to fulfill the paperwork that they're requesting you, the proof of your procedures and your contracts or your employee records and also your wage records and stuff. And having a good agent is one thing, because they'll be helping you with paperwork and whatever, but you may want to, depending on what's asked and what situation you're in, you may want to end up retaining a lawyer that has experience in labor law, other than some lawyers that are criminal lawyers or other types of lawyers. You want to find a lawyer that's experienced in wage and hour requirements, or if you're H2B in the immigration part. So, I mean, if you've done everything you're supposed to, that doesn't mean you can't still be audited. And some of the biggest headaches have been to the companies is meeting the requirement of what documentation they want. I mean, one company had to spend weeks gathering all the paperwork, and some of them go back to even the hiring process. They want to make sure that when you were having the job open, that you've interviewed the people when you advertised the job and stuff, and interviewed properly and stuff. So, whether you followed the requirements or not, it's never any fun to be audited. So, having legal representation is always a wise thing to do.
Okay. And one more along the labor side, for the companies that choose not to be in H2B and they're hiring local workers, and do you have any suggestions for them? Just any general knowledge that you've learned over the years on things they should be thinking about or doing?
Well, certainly you've got to have your I-9s in order, your proof of the citizenship of the worker, the proof that they give you for being legal to work. Make sure you understand what that paperwork looks like, and make sure you're not accepting any paperwork that looks very obvious of being fraudulent. But you've got to treat all your workers the same and all your I-9s the same. So you want to go back and maybe fix, if you've got failings on some of them, go back and get some of the documentation that you needed to make sure you're legal in that way. And then the other thing is just trying to field the workforce. There's different ways of trying to look for workers. We put some stuff out on our website. We have an H2B toolkit, and we also have a toolkit on our website on dealing with environmental questions on pesticides and fertilizers and organics and things like that. So we have some help out there for that. But make sure you know what the requirements are for I-9 forms and make sure your files are all up to date with the proper documentation and for your old workers and the new workers that are coming on.
So on your website, so you're referring to landcarenetwork.org. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay,
Yes.
so on landcarenetwork.org, where would someone, do you know offhand where someone would look for that information?
We'll go under the government affairs section and then look at the toolkits that are out there for dealing
Industry
with
tools. Does that sound about right?
Right.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So,
There's,
okay, great. So there's a big menu option called Government Affairs, and then they'll click on that and they'll look for the tools, industry
right.
tools.
Toolkits.
Perfect. Okay,
There's two toolkits there.
Excellent. Okay. And you earlier spoke about the H2B program in terms of contributing to the fund. How would someone go about doing that?
Well, they can contact me at tomdelaney@landcarenetwork.org, or on our website we have posted our H2B updates. You look under the updates, and out there we've listed the address and information for Greenberg Tarrig, which is the law firm that we're using, and we give you instructions of how to contribute directly to them on the lawsuit. And if you're dealing with an agent, you can work with your agent. Many of the agents are accumulating funds from their clients to send into the lawsuit.
Very good. Great. So I know we have limited time here, and I do want to talk about pesticides. So any last things that we should mention, or I know I've kept you for a while on labor, anything else we should say, or you
well, just
feel like that's good?
keep trying to be updated. Check our site, and certainly we encourage you to join the association and your state association. If you're in Texas Nursery and Landscape Association, state association, and many states have landscape contractor associations or lawn care associations in addition to joining Planet. And we have, when you join, special indicators that you can indicate your interest in H2B or pesticides or fertilizers, so that when we send out an alert, we send it out to all those that are interested in H2B. We don't want to inundate those members that don't use the program, because a lot of the chemical lawn care guys have to have English-speaking workers to work with their customers, and so they're not able to use the program if they're just Spanish-speaking employees.
Right. Okay. So is there anything? So one of the concerns for a lot of guys, like we said, was labor, and there are a lot of concerning things happening in the industry. And my argument is there's concerning things happening in every industry. So I like to mention that because I don't want guys to be deflated or scared off and think that the businesses are building are a waste. Do you, on the last note here, are there any positives that you're seeing on the labor side? Any positives, any good things happening that you can mention that are positives for our industry on the side of labor?
Well, I think it's still a good business to get in. Even with the economy, people are still possibly not meeting their growth expectations for the year, but still growing. So it's still a great industry to be in. You just have to be as professional as you can in the business. Too many people in the industry like working outside and forget the business part of it. Don't bid properly. Don't keep their paperwork right. You have to do the business side, have a good business plan, and go along with the working outside and the labor part of it. So many people, that's their retirement, is the value of their business, and it behooves you to keep its value up by following good management practices for business and good management practices for taking care of your clients and protecting the environment.
I couldn't agree more. I find that if companies will run their businesses like real businesses, and there's tremendous potential. I really believe in the business in this industry. So let's talk a little bit about the pesticide side of the industry and what's going on there, and a few of the challenges. So what are the, because I know we have limited time here, what are the biggest things that we should be looking at as business owners in this industry when it comes to pesticides, fertilizer, legislation?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's concerning to us is the attacks on the turfgrass and sector of the landscape industry. People are saying that it's a bad actor, it's a waste of resources, mowing that puts out pollution and uses fuels, fertilizers and pesticides that may pollute precious water to be used on that resource. And it's going to carry over to the landscape also in water needs and other needs. And we've had to fight some requirements or recommendations that the new landscapes only have 40% or less of the landscape being in turf grass. And as we look at, so we have to be, as I mentioned, stewards of the environment and look at all the resources we use to take care of the landscape and make sure that we're as professional as we can in what's being done. That, the pesticide area in all, just about, I think every state requires a licensing requirement, testing and licensing for people to be able to apply pesticides to the properties of others for a fee. So we want to make sure we're following not only the licensing requirements of the Departments of Ag or Environmental Protection or divisions within the states that regulate pesticide application, but that we're also following the label, because the label is the law. In fact, when I was a pesticide regulator, I used to have to write warning letters to homeowners when we were called out to a site where one homeowner misapplied a product and killed his own property, parts of his own landscape or somebody else's landscape. If we end up interviewing them, found out they didn't follow the label, then they were cited for misuse of the product as much as a commercial applicator that would misuse it. And at the same time as pesticides being an input for the landscape, so are fertilizers. And right now some of the states are, and particularly in the Chesapeake Bay area, because the president declared the Chesapeake Bay as a national treasure, they're looking at pollution into it from farms and residential runoff or whatever. And so several states, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia, have gotten some fertilizer licensing requirements now, where you have to take a fertilizer test to continue to put fertilizers out, and they're telling you what type of nitrogen you can put out, how much of it per 1,000 square foot, and what time of year you can put it out, because there's blackout periods between in some of the times. So as when the colder areas where there could be frost but may not, there have requirements of not being able to put out fertilizer during that period, nitrogen. Many states for years have had phosphorus requirements because of phosphorus runoff into water bodies causing algae bloom. And a lot of that phosphorus has been naturally occurring through soil movement and other types of properties. Even forests, leaves and stuff cause a lot of phosphorus to go to possibly move from a site because of excess stormwater runoff of carrying some of these things off. So we're having to be some of those same states that pass phosphorus requirements, and even requiring that the fertilizer that's being sold have a minimum amount of phosphorus or no phosphorus in there. And that part hasn't affected the industry as much, because most of our industry, as in soil testing and stuff, have found less need for phosphorus, and so they years ago, some of them have stopped putting the phosphorus out, but some of the states will still allow you to do it if you can prove by a soil sample that it's needed. So we look, and one of the things that most people are concerned about is what's happened in Canada, where most of the provinces, which are we call them states, they call them provinces, have outlawed the use of pesticides by homeowners and commercial companies on certain properties. And not properties on most pesticides at all. And so that's really affected a lot of companies in Canada getting out of the business, selling or just having problems with the value of their company anymore. They have, some of them, companies in some states and some groups are pushing organic applications. And I always ask a company that says they're organic, what portion of your program is organic? Are you just talking about your fertilizer, or are you talking about pesticides? Because there's literally no post-application weed control products for the commercial market that actually works. The only thing some people use is the corn glutamate, and even the inventor of it, Nick Christian from Iowa State University, says it's not really intended for commercial use because you have to put too much of it out and it's too costly. So it's got some residential uses. So the industry is concerned to have states getting pushed to pass any kind of requirements that will limit or ban pesticide use. But most states have what's called pesticide preemption, where local governments can't pass pesticide requirements because it's preempted by state law. But if the legislature ends up passing something at the state level, then all those other requirements won't help if that gets passed. We have a different legislative system than Canada has, but we still have to beware of legislation, and that's some of what I do is I track any piece of state legislation that's introduced that has the word pesticide, fertilizer, or some water requirements in there, that I get a copy of it and look at it, which in addition some other associations and groups are also monitoring some of those requirements. So again, we have to watch. Some states like New York have had laws passed like neighborhood notification, where local government allowed local governments to pass a set requirement where you had to notify certain property owners within distances of your application before your application was made. So we're trying to limit any restrictive requirements on pesticides or fertilizers, and certainly any bans that may be introduced out there. So it again behooves you to a lot of times these laws and regulations are sometimes passed or introduced because of a possible misuse of a product, and they end up saying, well, because this one person misused it, so many more people must be misusing it that we don't know about. So let's not have any of them introduced or passed because of somebody in the industry not doing what they're supposed to in following the label or the recommendations or the law, that state laws that are out there on pesticides. But just like we have associations, so do legislators. And when one passes in one state, I can guarantee you legislators in the other states know about that piece of legislation and what provisions are on it. So they, as copycats and want to keep their jobs to show they've passed something, that's why some of them end up introducing some of this legislation. But we do have some local governments now that are trying to stop pesticide use on their own county or property or city property, which of course they have their prerogative to, but what we're concerned about is the rationale of why they're doing it, or some of them trying to push organic control based on not a good set of criteria or circumstances of understanding what's truly organic and what works and what doesn't work. And we also have a document out on our website that discusses organics and what is, synthetic organic, what is organic based, and what customers should ask, and and what companies might follow in organic fertilizer application. There's some niche markets like the Northeast where more organic is programs are requested by the public, but a lot of companies offer it, but the demand is still not there. And then again, I question when you use that term if you're just talking about a fertilizer program or what type of pesticide application you might be referring to in organic, because even the organic insecticides, organic does not mean the product is safe. You can pollute with an organic, and some people are allergic to some of the organic products, just like people might be allergic to a synthetic product. So it's usually not the source, and the plant doesn't know the difference of what you're using. So we have members that do both, and you've got to answer what your customers demand and what they want, and some of them choose the program and then switch back, or stay with the program until a problem develops and then ask you to come out and take care of the particular weed problem or insect problem. And in Canada, the properties look terrible. There's dandelions all over the place. They call whiteouts now, when all the dandelions turn to seed and all of a sudden the wind blows across and it's all like a whiteout with so many of them out there. Sports fields, it's going to take a bunch of money to put some of the sports fields back into the shape they were before they stopped using the products. And they're using what's called iron now, a weed control product that's iron, that has some control of the weeds, but they have to make several applications, and it still doesn't work as well as some of the others. So some of the provinces are allowing them to use the herbicide that's made up of iron.
Has there been pushback on that program, or is it pretty much at this point just the way it is for the long term?
Well, I think a lot of agencies, government agencies, are looking back now at what the results of not having used products for so many years there, and I think some of them are questioning them, and especially if there's some insect or grub attack, and all of a sudden somebody's landscape is totally wiped out. And a lot of the rationale that they used wasn't scientific data. Just because you find something on the internet doesn't mean it's valid. Right. All the data that is used and required for products to be registered with EPA have to follow good laboratory practices and have procedures to be followed, and have to be peer-reviewed studies. But some of the studies other people promote and report are not peer-reviewed, or just don't fit the situation, or exaggerated.
So I feel like for a lot of companies, especially the younger guys in business, meaning their businesses are younger and smaller, they don't feel like there's much they can do. They just kind of have to deal with it. What are your suggestions, and for all of us in the business, in regards to how we can basically not just wait for legislation to happen, but essentially be involved?
Well, again, back to good management practices, and using integrated pest management. I mean, we all know that the products cost us money, so we all certainly try and use the process of only using them when they're needed, and using the right products. But we also try to get more people to be involved in grassroots, and that's making sure that you are letting your elected officials know who you are and what type of business you're in, how many customers you have, what your payroll is and stuff. You actually represent, as a business owner, more than a single voter, because you've got employees and customers, and you're also helping the economy in the city and state that you're in. So make sure your legislators know about that, so that they can even contact you when they see a piece of legislation that knows it's going to affect your business or your type of business. So we have a Grassroots Action Network on our website, and we're trying to sign more people up to pay attention to when a piece of legislation, help us find local. There is no way to track local legislation other than people monitoring newspapers and seeing what's on your agenda for your local county or city. It'd be a good idea to keep an eye on that, because something would be proposed and passed before anybody finds out about it at the local government. On the state government, we have a little better tracking system to find out about that. And the federal government, when you want something, it moves too slow, and when you don't, it moves a little too fast on some of the things. So that's why we have Legislative Day on the Hill for the last 23 years to bring members in. And this year we were lobbying the H2B issue. We were lobbying NPDES permits, where some states require a permit before you can make an application near water bodies. And also we were encouraging people to learn about Lyme disease and tick control that affects our members out in the landscape. And I've noticed, I think Texas is increasing with tick population, and so is many other states. So and educate your workers that are out in the landscape that get into areas where they might get exposed to ticks and end up with Lyme disease, which is very treatable but very hard to diagnose and know. So those were some of the issues we took to the Hill this year. But
that's good.
Gotta be involved. You gotta show up and follow the notices and the actions that we send out, and work with your state associations to help monitor what's going on in your state and local governments.
That's great. I've kept you a long time. One more question here. Kind of goes with the pesticide question and anything from the water side. So I know so I'm in Texas. We had severe drought, and we, in a sense, are out of our drought, at least in the part of North Texas where I'm at. And however, we're still under water restrictions. You can only water every twice a week, and that's been enforced for a while. What are you seeing around the country from the viewpoint of water and water management? Is there anything that we need as business owners to be aware of and be thinking about?
Well, different states have dealt with different water issues on droughts and stuff. Some of the states, the industry has gotten very much involved with the state in implementing water restrictions, so that maybe new plantings may be able to have some waterings, or that there's other requirements that don't put people out of business when it's not necessary. So there's been a lot of differences state by state, and then as some states let communities regulate it. So there's been differences out there, and so it's been a tough year, and we've been through some of this before. Some of the guys say their saving grace has been renovations, lawn renovations after these situations, and have gotten back up to their level of profit by doing that. Nobody wants to have to do that, but certainly lawn renovations are a question to do that. And then, we're getting more involved in water needs. There's actually a group I'm involved with, and there's I don't know if you all have heard what ANSI standards are, and ANSI standards are standards, professional standards that are developed that have to be followed under certain conditions by certain industries. And we're trying to work with the American Society of Agricultural and Biological Engineers. These are all the ag engineers at the universities and stuff, and some others, to come up with what are the true water requirements of the landscape. We know too many irrigation systems aren't properly calibrated. People don't know how to operate them. They overwater and cause problems. So we've got to get smarter about watering when it's raining with those types of controllers, smart irrigation controllers, and do a better job of irrigation and irrigation equipment. But we're going to work and get the science of what are the actual water needs of the turf grass and more landscape plants. A lot of turf grass, we know the ET, evapotranspiration rate, what is the water requirements of the turf grass, and know when it can go dormant and when it's got to be watered before it dies and stuff. So we've got to have better information about other landscape plants and all the turf grasses, and be smarter about what we plant in the landscape and how we care for it, so that we use what the minimum requirements are and not the maximum requirements. Because the biggest or the toughest resource we have is having enough water. We worry about oil wars and stuff. I think people are going to be more concerned about, as time goes by, is having enough water to grow the crops we need and take care of the landscapes that are environmentally and economically of importance to our customers and the environment.
So a lot of companies, a lot of business owners, they probably know they should be involved. They know they should be paying attention to these issues. But I've heard it before. There's a number of guys I've talked to over time, and I understand what they're saying. They're concerned about getting involved or being visible, or they want to keep a low profile and kind of keep their company flying under the radar. Is there anything you can say to that philosophy and that mindset? Because there's a lot of guys that are concerned about being, like I said, too noticeable in the industry and speaking up against things and taking a strong stand.
Well,
how should they be thinking about that?
Yeah, I've heard some of the same thing, and if you're not speaking for your own industry, who's speaking for you? You've got to sort of take a stand. If you're following all the laws and regulations and become educatable about how to answer some of the concerns people bring to you, where you can point to information and whatever, if you don't care for your industry enough to do the things that you have to do, and like I say, it takes grassroots. It takes a lot of people. Too many people either point to their association or point to the bigger companies and say they're going to do it for us. Well, it takes grassroots. Legislators only deal with their constituents that vote for them and get involved. And here we're coming up on the elections again. First of all, if you're not registered, you can't vote. So you need to register, encourage your employees and family members to register, and then go out there and get educated on who's running for office and what their positions are, and find out how they feel about the issues that affect your industry and how they're helping businesses, since small businesses are the workforce of our country, the machine that gets our country going, getting the economy, small businesses. So you just, if you're doing what you're supposed to do, you shouldn't have to hide and be low profile. And you get more high profile, you're going to get more customers too. And legislators are customers also. So, get them as your customer, or if they're your customer, talk to them about your issues, and make sure you're taking care of their property the right way.
That's great. Well, I appreciate all your time. Is there anything else that you want to say or that everyone needs to know before we get off the phone?
No, I think it's, like you say, you gotta get involved in your business and in your industry, and we'll all be better off for it, and we'll also get the economy going again.
I couldn't agree more. That's great. Well, Tom, thank you very much for doing this. Thanks for spending an hour with me, and I know everybody's appreciative.
All right, that's good, and we appreciate those that are members, and encourage more to join their state and national planet association.